It's time now for our weekly look at the big stories and the big issues in crime this week. And as always, guiding us through it, Jacqui Hames, who served with the Metropolitan Police for 30 years. Morning, Jacqui.
Morning.
And obviously one of the big stories today, very, very topical, is domestic violence. The Home Secretary, Teresa May, saying this psychological abuse needs to be brought into line. She's looking at trying to get some laws in place by at some point this week, or at least the beginnings of that. Highlights, I guess, just how big an issue this is.
It is a huge issue, and the difficulty has always been that this behind closed doors problem. These things, these psychological damage that is done to the victims take place over years behind closed doors, and it's incredibly difficult for law enforcement to deal with that backed up by the law. So we definitely need new laws in place, new powers to allow them to help these victims and get some justice for them and protection for them.
And also, I know there's been the issue of the gun amnesty as well, tied into what's been happening over the last week or so. Again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
How important is this in creating safer streets in Britain?
It is very important. There's been a change in the law there again to bring in. We need, to actually bring in antique firearms, which are being recommissioned by villains these days. So that's helped take a lot more guns off the streets, out of circulation, which is really important. We'll be hearing a bit more about that later on. But
in terms of the abuse issue and domestic abuse, we need to get the views of some experts, don't we?
Yeah. We've got DCI Trish Owen up in Manchester. DCI, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Brilliant. And you're in charge of the police response to domestic violence in the Greater Manchester area. How big of a problem is it for you, and do you think you're tackling it effectively at the moment?
Right. The problem is very big. We actually go to 65,000 DA incidents per year. That equates to about 172 a day. We're always looking at new and inventive ways to actually tackle domestic abuse. It is a real problem, and we know we've only touched the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. And what new ways? I understand you're launching an app to help victims record what happens to them. Can you explain that?
Well, we've got a couple of apps, but one of them is a scenario-based app. And that is to take a victim through the process of, well, be in the shoes of a police officer as if they were responding to a domestic abuse incident. This is only a pilot and it hasn't been launched properly yet. We also have other apps whereby the actual victim can utilise the app to record and summons the police.
How difficult is it to investigate domestic violence? I mean, I'm an ex-police officer. I know how traumatised so many of the victims are and how difficult they find it to contact the police. What are you doing about that?
Yeah. We're always doing domestic abuse awareness campaigns. We're always asking people to actually ring us in order that we can try and assist them and signpost them. What we want to do is just to reach out to get more people to actually phone the police. You're right, it's very, very difficult. And the issue is that sometimes they call the police at the crisis point, but then they don't want to provide a statement. And there's many, many reasons for that. Some of it can be financial, some of it can be that they just need the assistance at the time, but then are too afraid to go through with the actual criminal proceedings. So we're looking at different ways all the time to try and tackle that. You know, we look at domestic violence disclosure schemes, we look at DVPOs. The DVPO is a fantastic piece of legislation which allows us to take the offender out of the home for 28 days, which gives the victim of domestic abuse time to consider their options on what they want to do.
And it's the ongoing support afterwards, after that initial report, that is always a problem as well, because that's when they get frightened, they're back in the community and they think, oh, maybe this is not a good idea. And how do you keep that support going through the criminal justice process?
What we do is we work very closely with our partner agencies. We work with sort of like Women's Aid, we work with IDFA, which is the Independent Domestic Violence Advocates. These people, along with ourselves, try and support victims and support them through the criminal proceedings.
I want to introduce Harry Fletcher now, who's a campaigner against domestic violence and has been an intrinsic part of this legislation that Theresa May is expected to announce next week. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Jacqui.
How has this come about, this actually bringing in a law against this coercive control? What is it that you've been doing?
Well, I think it's fantastic that the police, campaigners, women groups, government are all working together, and the government are to be commended for what I expect they'll be announcing over the next few days. But really, it comes from way back in my days in probation, where probation ran programmes for perpetrators. They worked in that abuse was contained during the course of their participation in the programmes, but it got worse when the programmes ended. And victims were also supported by probation during that process, and they felt let down by the criminal justice system. When I looked at, with colleagues, what was wrong, the first thing we found was that women didn't report. It was 30 incidents before they did come to the police. The police tended to deal with the incident that happened that day rather than the totality of the behaviour, and therefore the bundle that went to the Crown Prosecution Service wasn't good enough to bring a charge that was representative of the totality of that behaviour. And that moved us closer and closer to the notion of criminalising the behaviour itself, coercive control, which could be physical violence, it could be psychological damage, it could be financial control, or it would be restricting the woman's movements, not letting her go out to see her friends. So we built up a body of evidence which we presented to MPs. I've had meetings at Downing Street, in the Cabinet Office, the Home Office, and gradually the government have been persuaded that they need to act, and it's fantastic that they're doing so.
So what evidence did you have that this psychological control could actually sometimes be more damaging than the physical abuse that the victims were suffering?
Oh, Jacqui, it's overwhelming. I was talking to two women over the course of the last few days whose lives have been ruined, really. Even though the damage happened many, many years ago, they've had to live with that forever. Their self-esteem goes, they have very, very low confidence. I was talking to some researchers from Liverpool on Friday who said, even if the abuse stops, if it's been long-term, the women never really recover. So I think that the government have been persuaded that this is a very, very serious matter, that it should be a priority for the police. I worry very much about police cuts. Reading in the papers just a few days ago talking about another 20%. And I also think it's essential that, as Trish was saying, that the police need to be properly trained so that they know how to gather the evidence. So it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult for all of us, but at least we're all facing in the same direction.
Yeah, and Trish, I want to come back to you and ask you, this is obviously a huge, brilliant step forward, but are you going to be able to deal with these cases using this new legislation? Are you going to have the facilities and the resources to do it?
Well, Jacqui, first of all, I'd like to say GMP have now taken domestic abuse as our #1 priority, and we recognise that we have to do more around vulnerability. So this new legislation is going to be fantastic for us. It's another tool for us to be able to tackle domestic abuse.
And in the run-up to Christmas is always a notoriously difficult time, and you get more and more incidents, don't you, of domestic violences during the festive season. What problems does that cause you?
It is. Normally, the run-up to Christmas, we do see an increase in the number of domestic abuse incidents. We have enough staff out there to actually manage that demand. And it's just looking at sort of like trying to help the victims. And we want people to actually phone us, and we want to be able to assist.
So if somebody's watching this and they're getting frightened, and they get more and more concerned and frightened for their safety, what should they do?
I would ask them to pick up the phone and to phone the police, even if they just want some advice as to who to go to. But if there is an incident that's going on, we will attend and we will speak to them about what their options are.
Well, thank you both for joining us this morning, Stephen. Though this is, a big issue, and it's going to get bigger in the run-up to Christmas. There are, when everyone's enjoying themselves and having a good time, unfortunately, domestic violence is on the increase. But this is a huge step forward to tackling it.
Well, I hope it gives people some light at the end of the tunnel, because we do know with domestic abuse, and particularly with the psychological abuse, that actually it's being able to pull away from that, which is very, very difficult for victims, isn't it?
It's so hard to quantify psychological abuse, but when it's happened over years and years, the damage done to somebody can sometimes never be repaired properly.
Well, let's hope if you are affected by that, it does give you that hope that you can actually do something about it and get the support that you need. We've got more from Jacqui in a moment, including our appeal for help tracing missing people, and we'll have a look at the success of the gun amnesties. Stay with us.